Okay, sir, are you ready to get going?
I am.
Whenever you're
You,
ready. Thank you.
you can see my screen?
And all good.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining us again, or for the first time for another update from SBA on where we're at right now with response to COVID-19 for small businesses. Um, First thing I want to do is let you know that we will have 3 more webinars scheduled so far, hosted by Greg Panicello and the SBDC. As most of you recognize, there are a lot of things changing and coming out every day. So these webinars won't be exactly the same, because as we get new information, we're going to be sharing it with you through this process. So what are we going to talk about today? This is basically going to be an overview of what we know right now. Primarily, it's going to be about the economic injury disaster loans, and also what has become available in the form of advances since the president signed the next version of the CARES Act on Friday. I know a lot of you have questions about the Paycheck Protection Program that's part of that. And I'll just tell you now, our information is very limited because that is not rolled out yet. People can't apply yet, but we are getting there very quickly. So the economic injury disaster loans, businesses that are eligible to apply are most small businesses, small ag co-ops, and aquaculture businesses, and a lot of the private nonprofits. So we know that many businesses are either directly impacted or they are providers to those that have been impacted. So it goes on down the chain of who's impacted by this disaster. The basic criteria we're looking for: credit history. Again, that's not something that we can tell you what the exact credit score is. It is a moving target as we continue to make adjustments to ensure that that truly eligible businesses and those that may be struggling have access to this. We also need to be able to see that you can repay the loan over a period of time. And of course, everybody is physically located in a disaster area at this time. So the economic injury disaster loan is up to $2 million. That is basically it's based on 6 months of your working capital needs. All of these loans will be on a 30-year term. We're doing that in order to keep the payments as low as possible. So whether it's $5,000 or $500,000, that'll be on a 30-year term. The interest rate for these is 3.75% if you're a small business, 2.75% for nonprofit organizations, and then all loans will automatically have their payments deferred for 12 months from the time of disbursement. But I will tell you is that interest does begin to accrue at the time of disbursements. So these funds, they're used to pay your fixed debts. You've got payroll, your accounts payable, other bills that you might have needed to pay. We do know that from what we are reading that the other loan product that's coming will also be available for some of these. So stay tuned on how you can maximize your benefits through the various programs available. So what are we looking for on how much you can borrow? So it's 6 months of operating expenses, basically what you need to stay in business right now. We have a new application process that I'm going to go through in the next few slides. And basically what we're going to be asking you for is what were your gross revenues for the 12 months prior to January 31st, 2020. So you can kind of look at it as your 2019 gross revenues. What were the costs of your goods sold? And we'll get into that a little bit further in the application, but essentially, your gross revenues minus your cost of your goods sold is going to be what your operating expenses are. If you happen to be a rental property owner, then we're looking at what lost rents might be due to the disaster. And that's commercial property or residential property. The other things that we're going to be looking for in the new application are how many employees did you have on January 31st, 2020? How many years have you been in business? And then, of course, information about the owners. We do know that Once your application is with a loan officer, if it looks like the amount needed is going to be more than $200,000, there probably will be some additional analysis that's required. And we do know that these funds will be given in a lump sum payment all at once. So collateral requirements. So any of these loans that are less than $25,000 are not going to require any collateral. For loans over $25,000, SBA will look at business assets and take the positions that we can get on collateral. We will not be securing real estate as collateral, including your personal residence. And we're not going to decline a loan simply because there's not enough collateral available. So eligible industries, just about anything. So we could talk about more along the lines of what's not eligible. And then, of course, as I said before, all of the businesses or all of the counties in the country have the disaster declaration. So the physical presence is not really going to be a factor. So ineligible businesses are going to be agricultural enterprises. So there is a definition in the Small Business Act about what an agricultural enterprise is. Something simply to kind of think about is if you yourself or you have a client you're working with that files a Schedule F on their taxes, they likely are not going to be eligible. Religious organizations generally are not eligible. However, if they've got affiliated services that they charge a fee for, such as a camp, a daycare, a school, those may qualify. Charitable organizations are generally ineligible. Gambling concerns, casinos, and racetracks. So the thing about the SBA's work, economic injury disaster loans, that's a little different than other SBA products is these come directly from SBA through the U.S. Treasury. You do not apply at the bank. You apply directly to SBA at sba.gov/disaster. There is no cost for applying to this program. You're under no obligation to take the loan. You're under no obligation to take the full amount that's offered. If you are able, let's say your business recovers quickly and you no longer need those loans funds, you can pay back that loan. There are no prepayment penalties for paying in full ahead of schedule. So here is the new process. Again, you're going to go to sba.gov/disaster. And then in the yellow bar at the top of the screen, you'll see what I've got here for COVID-19, click here. So now we're going to go through the application process and what you're going to need to fill out, what you're going to need to have ready. So you'll see here on the site itself, and then I've highlighted it for you here, is that the estimated application time is 2 hours and 10 minutes. I've been through it a few times. I've talked to some business owners that have been through it already. This just became available yesterday morning. Most of those are taking much less time. If it is a entity-owned business, so for instance, you've got an umbrella organization that owns your business, then it's going to take a little more time when you start getting into kind of the ownership information and getting down the weeds. But generally speaking, I think that the 2 hours, 10 minutes is probably a very long time. I don't think that's going to be reality for most people. So the first thing you're going to have to choose is you're going to have to determine if you're an eligible entity verification. You're going to do the eligible entity verification. So basically that's a business. We're trying to determine that you're small. So less than 500. Are you a sole proprietor? You go through all of these questions and you pick the one that fits you best to determine that you're eligible. The next thing is that we're going to look at and see, go through the things that would make you ineligible. So that you're going to check all of the following. Just a heads up, if you don't check all of them, then you're not eligible. So you look here and see that, and you're going to certify that you're not engaged in illegal activity. You're not delinquent on child support obligations. You're not an agricultural enterprise. and all of these other things, and that you're not, gambling, casinos, you're not a lobbyist, but you're also not a government entity or a member of Congress. So once you get through those things, and that was your basic eligibility as a business, then you're going to get to the actual application. So what I've done here is just kind of created an example for you to look at. So put in your business legal name. That needs to be your exact business legal name, not your trade name. So you can see here, I said that my legal name is ABC Store LLC. I'm operating as Sarah's Store. If you're a sole proprietor, you're going to use your social security number here. Otherwise, your employee identification number. And then the next question is going to be, what type of organization are you? So this is going to be your business structure. So here are the choices when you get to your organization type. You can see them all listed here. For the example purposes for this, I chose that I'm an LLC. So the next questions that they're going to ask you is, are you a nonprofit? If you say yes, then there's going to be a few other questions that you'll have to fill out. Are you a franchise? Here I've chosen no, but if you do choose that you are a franchise, you're going to have to make sure that your franchise is eligible and on the SBA's list of accepted franchises. So here's where we get into kind of, how much money do you need as a place for the loan officer that reviews this to start. So we talked before that it's 2019 gross revenue, or the 12 months prior to January 31st, 2020. So maybe it's February to January. And then cost of goods sold, which is also known as cost of sales or cost of services. And basically what that is how much it costs to produce your product or your service. Essentially, that's business operating expenses. So whatever the cost of your direct materials are, the cost of the labor that goes in to produce your material or your good, that's going to be what your cost of goods sold are, and that's what goes in that column. And then again, as I mentioned before, if you do have rental property, if you're a commercial, if that's where your business is and derives this income, then you would put that information here. So if you do choose that you're a nonprofit, then ask for is 12 months, your cost of operation for the previous 12 months, and then also what your combined annual operating expenses were for your secular activities. So you will have to separate that out. The cost of essentially your daycare, a camp, a school, whatever it might be. And then we're going to ask you to provide a list in this comment box of what those services are. And then I'm not sure that it's applicable right at this moment, but it might be for people that apply a week or two from now. Compensation that you might have received from other sources for this disaster, and then a description of what it was. So once you get through that initial part, you're going to get into now your business information. So as we've said, your business address cannot be a PO box. That's part of being located in having a physical presence in a declared county. So please don't put a PO box there. And then when you get to the bottom, alternative business phone, there's going to be a place later in the application where they ask for the owner's cell phone number. But I would also just suggest that you add your cell phone number here as an alternate in case the person processing your application does need to reach you. Additional information about your business, such as your email. Then we're going to look at what day was your business, when was the business established, and how long has the current owner had it. So we've talked before that there's some change of ownership requirements and things that you didn't purchase. For instance, the official disaster date is January 31st. Did you buy this business on March 1st when you would have known that it is impacted by the COVID-19 disaster? So those are the things we're looking for here. So how long has the business been in business, and how long have you owned it? The next part is, if you look back here where we've got business activity. So this is going to be, what kind of business are you? So when you choose that menu, this is the list of things that are going to pop up. So there's a whole host of things. Hopefully you can find your business type in this organization, in this list of business types. It looks relatively comprehensive to me. For the purpose of this example, I chose that I was I believe I chose I was an eating and drinking place. And so that will come into play. The next box is your detailed business activity. So then we're going to get into a little bit more specific. So I chose eating and drinking place as my business type. And then you've got a list here of what kind of, and you can also choose none of the below. But here are the kinds of eating or drinking place that you might be. For me, I chose that I was an ice cream shop. And then they're going to ask you, how many employees did you have on January 31st, 2020? I chose 6 for my ice cream shop. So at this point, now you're going to get into ownership information of the business. So the first thing you need to ask, or you need to answer, is your business owned by a business entity? So I said I'm Sarah's store or Sarah's ice cream shop, and my actual business name was ABC LLC or something along those lines. So in this, to show you what this is going to look like, I actually chose that I am owned partially by a business entity. So if your business that's applying is not owned by an affiliated business or some form of umbrella or another LLC or a trust, you would just say no right here. You are not owned by a business entity. So I, for this example, have said yes, that I am owned by a business entity. So now that's going to ask me about the parent entity for this applicant. First thing they ask is what kind of parent business owns it. And again, I chose LLC because that's the most common. So when I chose LLC, now it's going to ask me what percent ownership does the business entity have in your company. So I chose that it's 50%. So now I go down to, so who is the owner of that 50% LLC? The idea here is that you're trying to get down to a person, if possible. So you put in all of your information here about who the owner is. And again, I chose that I'm a 50% owner of the LLC that owns my business. All of your information, you have to certify that you're a U.S. citizen. And then because I only owned 50%, I want to add and say who owns the other 50% of my business. So you're going to say add additional owner here and then choose next. So when you do this, and I chose Wayne Bell to be the other 50% owner of this business, you could put all of the information in here, and then you can proceed unless you have more owners to add. You also at this point can remove anybody that you changed your mind about having on this part. So now you're into basically, this is step 3 of 3. Now that you have your kind of your revenues and expenses in here, you've got your ownership listed out. This is kind of the last step. So now we're asking, have you been convicted of a criminal offense in connection with riots or civil disorders and that sort of thing? Are you currently suspended or debarred from doing business with the government? And have you been arrested in the past 6 months for criminal offenses? And that sort of thing. So you're going to answer yes or no to these questions. And for my case, I answered no for all of them. And then we have here, if anybody assisted you in completing the application and whether that's free or not. So for those of you that are working with our resource partners or economic development agencies, this may be important. I spoke with a customer, a caller yesterday who had no internet access and no computer at all. So he's going to need help with somebody to submit this form online. And so whoever ends up helping him, whether it's he pays a fee for it or just gets it for free, they're going to need to put this part in here, and then you say yes or no about whether and it really should be yes. I give permission for SBA to discuss this application with whoever it was that helped them put it in. So here is the part that is new as of Friday when the president signed the CARES Act into law, is that this allows us to do an advance on these loans. And that's part of the reason for the new site, other than it's also much faster processing and is making things happen quickly. But this is one of the things that came about for the CARES Act, is that we can now do an advance of up to $10,000 associated with your emergency or economic injury disaster loan application. So if you are interested in getting those funds, then you need to check mark the box. Yes, I would like to be considered for the advance. And then you're going to provide your banking information because it will be direct deposited. And just as a note, for anybody that previously applied using either the online portal, sent in paper forms, uploaded forms to the site through Dropbox, emailed, or hard copy mailed those forms, if you want this advance, you still have to do this process in order to get it. It's the only way that we are able to get the advance to you. The advance, if you qualify for the advance, you can get it without, even if for whatever reason, maybe your full loan application is not approved, you still can have the advance. And it's something that basically to get cash in hand to the small businesses, so that while we're going through the loan approval process, that they will have funds to keep going in this interim. If you have already applied and you don't need or want the advance funds, then there's nothing that you need to do in this new site. Anybody that's new to applying will have this option automatically. But again, if you've already applied and you want to be considered for this advance, you've got to apply through this site again. Now, what I will tell you is that it does not impact your existing application. What you will find is that if you've already submitted an application, and let's say you did it through and you got an email confirmation and your application number, when you do this new system in order to get the advance, you will get another application number. That is not going to affect your existing application. You're still in line with your application number on the first one, for those to be processed in the order they're received. So don't worry about this knocking you out of line for the full loan amount. So once you get through this part and say yes or no that you want to be considered for the advance, here's you're going to get through to the certifications. And so this is going to be that you're authorizing us to look at your credit history, to verify your employment information, that you are not discriminating against people, and that you're saying that everything you've put in here is truthful information. And so you're going to check mark the box at the bottom. If all of these things are true, you're check marking the box under penalty of perjury of the laws of the United States that everything you've submitted is correct. There are also additional certification statements and some of the executive orders. You can click on that link if you want to read the rest of them. And once you've done that and you've done your certification, the next screen you're going to get is to review your application summary. So this is your chance to go back and make sure, yes, I put in the right information. So my business legal name, yes, it's correct. Here's my actual trade name. Here's my employee identification number. I didn't get that wrong. And let me look again and make sure that I fully accounted for my gross revenues and my cost of goods sold. So that all looks good. If I want to change anything, including, you'll also get to see all of those other screens. When you just start scrolling through, you'll see all of the other screens on here for your owner's information, the entity information if you are owned in part by a business entity. And then you also have the ability with the edit icon there, you can edit any of that stuff right here on this summary screen without having to go back through the process. So once you have reviewed your application, you're going to verify that you're not a robot and you'll hit submit. Now, a few things that you need to know about this site. There is no user registration. So because you're not creating a login and an ID and all of that, what that means is you can't save your information and return later to complete it. So my suggestion is that you be prepared and have your owner information as well as your revenues and your cost of goods sold Have that stuff ready and in front of you before you sit down to start the online application. If you do happen to request in advance, we believe these are going to be processed very quickly, and in some cases in as little as 3 business days. Again, the idea is to get cash in hand as quickly as possible. I'll just say it again because it's important. If you previously applied another way and you want to get this advance, you have to do it again through the new system. You're not going to lose your place in line. Your original application number will be maintained, even though you'll get a second one for this advance request that you're making. So I want to talk a little bit about what that advance is. It's up to $10,000. If it's approved, you can use it for payroll and other operating expenses, and the advance will be forgiven. As far as the details about the advance being forgiven, we don't have the exact details on that, but the information we have received from headquarters about the up to $10,000 is that it will be forgiven at a later date. So, and just to remind you that, once you submit this basic information through the online questionnaire, there is a possibility that you're going to be asked for more information in order to determine how much assistance your business really needs. So, and you may need a more detailed schedule of liabilities. You may need to submit profit and loss statements. So as a reminder, the folks at the small business development centers, the women's business centers, the veterans business, the SCORE counselors, economic development folks around in your towns and counties, chambers of commerce, those folks can help you if you need that help to reconstruct your financial records or any of that additional information. They're there to help you do that in case you need it to support your application. So a couple of things, just reminders again, is that make sure to complete all of the sections on that questionnaire as accurately as you can before you submit. The better your information is as far as your revenues and your expenses, the better we'll be able to accurately determine the loan amount that you need. So this is a different process than what you would be used to at a bank, where you might go in and say, I need $100,000. In this case, it's the SBA. By looking at the information you provide, we're going to make you an offer of how much we can offer you basically for working capital. If it turns out that in the next 6 months that you do need more funds, these applications are available through December. If more funds are needed, you can submit supporting documents and request an increase. It's not going to be a process where you have to apply all over again. It'll be that you request an increase in your loan amount. And the same way, you can also request a reduction in that amount as well. So we know that some folks have been that have made it through the various ways that we were taking applications before. We know that some of those folks were denied already. So what we suggest is that, so for anybody that has a denial, you have 6 months that you can provide new information and submit a written request for reconsideration. But what we want to let you know is that if you know folks or you yourself have had a loan denied already, contact our customer service center because our conditions really for how we're approving loans, they literally are changing daily. So, maybe there's a different credit threshold that we're looking at now. So my suggestion to anybody would be is that go ahead and contact customer service if you've already been denied and speak with them about it. If you've got an application number, make sure you have it and see what they can do for you. So I talked again about other information that may be requested, and that our partners at the SBDCs and the chambers and SCORE can help you with that. So here's some other things that might be requested, particularly if you start looking at those loans that are greater than $200,000. We think that they may request a tax transcript, and so you'll have to do an authorization form. For those folks that are 20% or more owners or your original partners, we may want your most recent business tax returns. There may be a need for a personal financial statement for 20% or more owners and partners. And as I said, we may need a more detailed look at your schedule of liabilities, so what your monthly operating expenses actually are. So we're going to transition real quickly to the Paycheck Protection Program. Sorry for the typo there. So this is the program that was recently authorized by the CARES Act that was signed on Friday. So here's what we know about Paycheck Protection. This is being jointly issued by the SBA and the Treasury Department, because there's a lot in there that impacts both agencies. We will have additional information to share in the coming days. I know everybody wants to know right now how it's going to work, but it's just not available yet. Sorry, excuse me. So what we can tell you is that the Paycheck Protection Program is going to be offered through the local lending institutions. Applications will be taken by those local banks. They will have an application form provided by SBA, and they do not have those yet. So I know the banks are ready to go. We've had a ton of calls from lenders that are ready to get started and help their clients, but we just don't have that to them yet, and we're really, really hoping that it's coming in the next few days. And I'll tell you that as soon as these become available, there will be media blasts from every direction. It's going to be from social media. We're going to have all of the partners are going to send things out. The lenders are going to get the information not only from us, but from organizations like the American Bankers Association. So I know you want the information now. We want to give it to you, but just stay tuned so that we can make sure we get this right. So, and here is why kind of where we're at and why we're saying this is that if you've seen any media about this since Friday, or actually even before Friday, before it became law, you can see a lot of variety in the analysis of the language by several different individuals and organizations. And in fact, sometimes it's not even the Paycheck Protection Program. Sometimes I've seen it referred to as the Payment Protection Program. So because everybody kind of takes their own spin or tries to interpret legislation honestly the best way they can, but the only interpretation that's going to count is the one that SBA and Treasury issues. So because of that, we want to be very careful about anything that we confirm or say I think it's going to be, because we want to ensure that the rules are consistent between the two agencies, that the procedures are in place. And because like I said, SBA and Treasury, theirs is the interpretation that's going to count, because we're the agencies that are going to be charged with implementing this program. And I say all that because we want to get it right. It's so much harder to walk back any misinformation that we might put out there than it is to give you the right information to begin with. And a couple more things that I want to remind you of is to beware of scams. We're seeing them everywhere. IRS is putting things out. We're putting things out. The most recent thing that we've seen is about there being an immediate deadline. I had heard last week that the deadline was going to be March 31st. After March 31st, you couldn't apply for both of these things anymore. That's not true. There is no immediate deadline to apply for economic injury loans. There is not a cost to apply for economic injury loans. These are the ones that are provided directly by SBA to the small business. There is no credit card needed for any of this. So just beware that people are trying to take advantage of this situation, and there are scams that are going on right now. If you have any doubts, please contact an SBDC person or an SBA local staff member, and we can help you determine whether this is true or not. So I'll give you an example. So last night at somewhere around 10 o'clock or so, every person that had applied through the portal and previously before the portal went down, they all got an email from SBA saying this new site is available. If you want to get a $10,000 advance, you need to apply through the new site. And so I did have a couple of businesses reach out and say, is this legit? Did this really come from you? So it does not hurt to ask the question. Yes, if you receive those emails, that is completely legitimate. We are asking you to apply again if you want the advance. And then I'll just tell you that with things having been in flux and the application processing changing a few times since all of this started, a lot of people really want to check the status of their economic injury disaster loan application. We can't do that locally. We don't have any insight into the system. So if you want to check the status of your application you already submitted, you're going to have to call or email the Disaster Customer Service Center, and I've got the number there as well as the email. I will tell you that in the last several days, they've added, I think the number was 3,000 customer service representatives. So the call volume and wait time, the wait time is significantly decreased. They have also given 2 options. If you want to check on your existing application, there's an hour window that you can do that. If you're calling just for general information, then that number, there are operators available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for just general information. So you can't get your application status 24 hours a day, but the center is staffed up better, and they will be adding even more staff in the coming days, including some from FEMA, is my understanding. So do call if you want to check your status, call or email. And with that, if you need us, here are, there's 4 of us listed here. We've got a couple more staff members I didn't put up here, but email, we've got all of our cell phones here. We're all working in various locations, some in the office, some at home. So make note of this. You're free to call us, and we will do our best that we can to help. And so with that, Greg, if we've got questions, I would be ready for me or somebody from the team to try to answer them.
Would you like me to read them, or would you like Michael have to read them and you and he answer? How would you prefer?
Can you go through them? I haven't looked at them yet.
Yeah,
And then
there are 64.
I will jump in and answer.
There are 64 questions right now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
First one is we have reduced our employees' hours by the maximum 40% so that they may file for unemployment insurance. I was told that the reductions were limited to 20% to qualify for disaster loans. So I am unclear how this works. Please address this if possible.
So I'm not sure, and Michael, jump in if you want to. I'm not sure that we're in the best position to answer that at this point. It sounds like with the percentages and that sort of thing, that could be referring to some of the requirements for loan forgiveness through the Paycheck Protection Program, and possibly some of the keeping, whatever the very first one that was passed was called, Keeping America's Families First or something. Michael, do you have anything to add there?
I'm looking at the questions, but I don't see it. Like I didn't hear you right, Greg. What was the question?
The question was whether or not the 40% reduction is too much to qualify for the disaster loans.
Well, we're telling people because this is a no obligation, loan benefit, if you will, from the SBA, that people should apply anyway. And yes, they'd have the investment of time to complete the application. But yeah, like Sarah said, I was not even aware of that issue. So
I think that
we
there's
always apply anyway.
an element here, Michael, and that's that they can go from what I read in the regs, you can go as far as furloughing the employee and still qualify. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, and that's going to be for the ones that's not available quite yet, because for the economic injury loan that is available right now, that's not a requirement.
Great. So that'll follow up with when we have the regs.
Correct.
Great. Next question is, if I take the PPL loan now, but don't experience any losses or need to use the funds until July or August, will the loan still be forgiven? The 10,000, I'm assuming.
There's a misnomer there. This is not the PPL. That's the Paycheck Protection Program, which we don't have answers for right now. We're talking about the economic injury disaster loan, and people can, when the loan officer for the SBA connects with them about their application to approve the loan, at that point, the business owner can say, you know what, I don't need all of it, or I just need half, or I don't need it at all. But once it's dispersed, it is a loan. And as far as the, $10,000 advance, that is by itself, from what we've been reading, that would be forgivable. But the loan in excess of that is still a loan, so they'd have to pay it back if they didn't need it. They have, 30 years to do that if they wish. There's no prepayment penalty. So anyway, that would be my answer.
I think there'll be more answers as we get the regs as well. In the cost of goods, that includes employee salaries and rents, payments, etc. I don't see a question, so I'll have to let that one go, and we'll have to try to answer it later. For the employee question, do we include part-time staff? In other words,
Yes, they would.
on the application, do they include part-time staff?
Yes, they're employees. I'll include in the question and answer there is a full-time equivalent calculator that's out there. So 2 part-times could equal 1 full-time. So
Great.
So yeah.
What if employees were hired after January 1st of 2020?
I think the question has more to do with the Paycheck Protection Program, which is not what we're talking about here. I'll go back to once again saying that this economic injury disaster loan is meant to help small businesses cover their monthly expenses, which includes payroll, and loan payments, utilities, taxes, things like that. It's meant to keep a business solvent for a 6-month period until the economy improves, where they can earn enough revenue to pay their monthly, expenses. So that's the whole purpose of this disaster loan. And the Paycheck Protection Program, I mean, that's a different conversation. So I think that's what this question is referring to. In fact, a lot of them are about employees and this and that, and we'll know more very shortly.
So barring the clarification of the regulations, this seems to be what they were trying to work towards solving. So probably will be approved, but not until we know the regs. Are employees full-time, part-time? If part-time, do we use equivalent employees I assume on the application? And again, that's probably going to be a similar answer.
Yes.
Is the employee count as of January 31st, 2020, counting only FTE or FTE and PTE, which I'm assuming is part-time employees?
Well, there is no such thing as a part-time equivalent. FTEs is the full-time equivalent, and that's one number. And depending on the hours of the part-time employee, that would equal to however full-time employees there are. I wouldn't let people get too bogged down with that minutia. I mean, if you have, you have five part-time employees, you could put down 5 or 3, because a lot of these details will get finalized when the loan officer connects with the business owner. And once again, the economic injury disaster loan has everything to do with a business's monthly expenses and keeping the business solvent. It has nothing to do with the number of employees and this and that. I mean, these questions are referring to the Paycheck Protection Program, which is a different program that was tied to our 7A loan guarantee program, which is processed by lenders. It's totally different than the direct federal assistance through this economic injury disaster loan.
Would a nonprofit be considered a trust? I believe there was a reference to the trust in the presentation.
I don't know if that has any bearing with this. The nonprofit organizations that are not charities or religious like churches and temples and things like that. They, if they're a private nonprofit, they should apply.
Example says your gross income is 85,000 and your cost of goods sold is 40,000. So how much would you need from the SBA?
The disaster loan amount is meant so that you can cover your expenses because you don't have enough revenue to do so. These disaster loans are not meant to replace your revenue. They're not meant to replace your profit margin. The whole process of analysis is to figure out if the business owner does not have liquid assets available, him or herself, does not have a sufficient revenue, sales coming in, and they've got, let's say, $6,500 they have to pay every month. So if they only have $1,000 available on a monthly basis to cover the $6,500 bill, then the loan amount would be equivalent to $5,500 more or less, so that they, in essence, break even and do not become insolvent. It's meant to help supplement lost revenues in order to pay their monthly expenses. So this is not, a program where you can obtain because these are tax dollars. We have to remember, we have to be judicious and do our due diligence to ensure nobody's taking advantage of these disaster loan dollars, and that they're truly meant for businesses that cannot make their monthly payments because they don't have liquid assets and they don't have enough sales to pay those monthly expenses.
Thank you. What if there is more than one LLC or trust that owns the business?
Well, they will need to be, depending on the size of it, they will need to disclose the ownership and especially if there's an LLC that owns 20% or more of the business, that documentation from that LLC will need to be a part of this application. So maybe that answers that question.
I think you're right. If the business is a nonprofit, is the executive director considered the owner? How do you know what to designate the owner as?
Well, with the personal financial statement, the information that's required needs to be someone with signatory authority, and that could be the director, the managing partner. So that is what that's about.
Okay. I am a C corp with over 70 shareholders. Now, none of which are over 5% owners. How to handle that?
Well, someone needs to, same thing we have with our cooperative situation where, everybody's a co-owner. And that somebody with signatory authority or designated by the organization will need to be, to complete that part of the application.
Thank you. Is this loan part of the forgivable loan program that is related to COVID?
Well, this is one, the advance that we talked about, that Sarah talked about, up to 10,000 is part or all forgivable. That is what we discussed, and so that's what we're talking about. The other forgivable, aspects of the Paycheck Protection Program related to employees. That's a separate deal. And we're still waiting for those details right now.
As it stands, the full economic injury disaster loan, aside from the $10,000 advance, the rest of that is not forgivable at this point.
Thank you. I applied last Thursday. Can I assume the application I submitted at that time, very similar but not exactly the same, is still appropriate, or do I need to reapply?
The only reason you need to reapply is if you are interested in getting the advance of up to $10,000. If you applied before, then your application has been received. You only reapply if you want to try to get the advance.
That's a great reason to reapply. Are personal guarantees required for loans over $200,000?
There is some collateral. I mean, these disaster loans under 25,000 do not require collateral. But as Sarah said in the presentation, we do not reject the loan or disaster loan application solely based on a collateral question. But the larger the loan amount that's needed from the business, we would be looking for that, to protect taxpayer dollars.
Okay. I am a seasonal employee of my own S Corp and generally only take a paycheck after the season is done. Is that going to have an adverse effect on my loan amount?
In this particular loan application, the economic injury disaster loan, it talks about the 12-month period of your revenues and your cost of goods sold or cost of services. And so that, expense of, their compensation would be reflected in the cost of services or cost of goods, the cost of goods. So I think that once again, they're referring to what they've been reading about the Paycheck Protection Program, which we'll talk about once we have more detail.
Okay. Will permanent residents, not U.S. citizens, qualify for the loan? Any negative impact?
No, it's if you have legal status, then you would just indicate that in the application.
I filled out the application on the portal before it went down and have an email with a reference number. Do I need to reapply or just wait?
I assume the person's referring to the portal early last week, if they were one of the fortunate few that actually got their application in and received the confirmation number or reference number. So that's good. They can, as we've been saying, these disaster loans often take 2 to 3 weeks to process. We're hoping to speed that up, but they should be receiving, status, as Sarah mentioned earlier, that everyone that applied successfully should have and may this evening receive an email notice that, from the SBA confirming that. And they can always send an email to the disaster customer service at sba.gov with the reference number to obtain a status of it. But if they received the reference number, confirmation number, then they need, that's good. I mean, that's all they need to worry about is the fact that they have that. So it's just a matter of a little patience right now.
I keep seeing rhetoric that this $10,000 advance is eligible to be not repaid. What does this mean?
So I will say that every official information that we've gotten from headquarters, as well as the email that went to everybody that had already applied, letting them know about this new portal and the advance. All of those messages say that the up to $10,000 will be forgiven. So that's all we know. We don't know what that looks like as far as, does that mean I don't know. It all says the 10,000 will be forgiven.
So what we'll do is we'll just have to say that until the regulations and the process becomes clearer, we won't have an answer. Michael, is that FTE employees? I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, I will put in the Q&A, I'll put the link for people where they can calculate. It's an FTE calculator, and so people can use that. But like I said, if a business had technically 5.5 FTEs and they put 6 or 7, that's not going to be detrimental to the application. Like I said, it's it just because it has nothing to do with the purpose of the loan is to pay the business's ongoing expenses that they cannot otherwise pay. That's the purpose of a loan.
Thank you. What if I applied online and got a message that said your application has been submitted, but I never received a confirmation email or loan application number?
If you got that your application has been submitted, it should be good, but I would recommend calling the customer service center.
Thank you. I sent in a paper application due to other online issues. How can I verify the application has been processed? My wait time on the SBA phone application confirmation has been over 3 hours. I sent to the SBA last week and have not heard back anything on my EIDL application. I've heard on my Care Grant app.
I don't know what the Care Grant app is, but as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to speed up the process, but these economic injury disaster loans typically take 2 weeks to process. So we're hoping that will be vastly increased because tomorrow the rent is due and such, and so if it was received, if you had the message on the screen saying that it was submitted successfully, that should give them peace of mind, and maybe sending an email with the well, if they don't have a confirmation number, they can't reference it, but we hope to get more answers quickly as far as status updates.
This next one's a long one, but I think what it really came down to is if you, I'd like to consider the application of up to the $10,000. Hypothetically, they received the 10 grand a week later. 1 month later, they are matched with a loan officer and go through their application. They determine that the business is eligible for 50. At that time, the business decides to either decline or accept half of the amount offered. Do they get to keep the 10 in either case? Is that clear or not?
Yeah, that's pretty clear. And so if they decide not to take the full 50, then yes, they still have the 10.
Good. Is the advanced portion of the grant that will not be repaid? Is it, okay, so if somebody only takes the 10 grand, then they don't, and assumably that it'll be forgiven, and that means it does not have to be repaid. I think that's a request for confirmation. Is the advanced portion, the grant, that will be to repaid, have to be repaid? I'm assuming that that's what that means, and so the answer is that would not have to be repaid if that was the extent of the borrowing. Is that close to your mind?
If the needs of the business uh, was exactly 10,000, and the loan officer went through all that, and they determined that it was 10,000, then that would be true. It basically would be the advance. But there may be some businesses where all they need is 8,500 to get through, and so maybe that portion would be forgivable. As Sarah mentioned, the language we received has been very thin. It's just that the advance, as Sarah said, the advance portion would be uh, forgiven, meaning basically a grant.
It's great. LLC with owner not receiving W-2 wages is counted as an employee for the purposes of this application. That's a question.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with this application for the economic injury disaster loan. As I mentioned, that has to do with these other programs that we're getting word on. This loan application, the economic injury disaster loan, focuses on revenues, liabilities, expenses, and the need of the business owner uh, in order to remain solvent, the business to remain solvent.
My credit rating impact of the loan is not approved. Will my credit rating impact if the loan is not approved? Yes. Credit rating is an issue, correct?
Uh, the credit, there is no magic credit score that we look at, because frankly, we've been told that threshold moves up and down. I mean, it depends on the needs of the business, the feasibility of the business, and where else was I going to go with that? And the ability to repay the loan. If someone knows that their credit score is very low, and it really had nothing to do with how they operated the business, it had to do maybe with a personal issue, divorce, whatever, that they they should clarify that. And I wanted to ask Sarah, with the new portal, if the narrative section are still there for people to type in clarifying statements, as was the case in the PDF.
No, there is no ability to do a narrative section.
Okay.
But don't let that be discouraging at all. I think that it's going to be, I mean, I know that we are doing everything we can to make as many people qualify. So I think if the loan officer, when in doubt, will contact you.
Great. The advance on loan is while SBA approved my EIDL loan. Why if it is not approved and I have, what if it is not approved and I have the advance? They get to keep it, correct?
Correct.
If they apply for the loan, it's not approved, and then they end up getting the advance somehow, they get to keep the advance.
That's right.
Will these slides be available for this presentation? I decided to read that. I've got like 20 questions on that one. Yes, it will be emailed to every registered attendee. So by tomorrow. How long does a business need to be in operation to qualify?
The longer the better. I mean, the questionnaire, asks for, the 12 months of revenues and, liabilities for 2019. And so that is the generic version of this form. And so newer businesses still need to state what their, revenues were and their liabilities, and, still apply. The numbers may be low because they were only in operation for 3 months, but we still encourage people to apply.
Okay. Is the 10,000 advance a grant?
Yeah, it's forgiven, so in a sense, it's a grant.
If no cost of goods sold, service business, do you indicate zero or disclose operating expenses?
Yeah, you would disclose as a service business the cost of services, which includes the overhead, um, the expenses and liabilities that you need to cover. Um,
Yeah, payroll for the employees providing the service, right?
yeah, yes.
So basically, you report the operating expenses. If we applied on the long form last week and uploaded and sent, we did not get a confirmation number. Should we resend it?
So no, unless you want to apply for the advance. So with the Dropbox upload version that they had, there wasn't a confirmation number coming with that. Again, you're more than welcome to call customer service. They did add a bunch of representatives, but there was not a confirmation email last week for Dropbox applications. At least not initially, there wasn't.
So that means they should reapply or check.
They should check. I mean, yeah, they can check. And if they want the advance, they need to reapply.
There's another good reason to reapply. Where can I find documentation that the 10 grand will be forgiven at a later date? I cannot take on any additional debt.
We are waiting for that. We've been told that with confidence, but as far as the official, here's the procedures and everything else for some of these things that we're waiting on it. Michael, do you have any other information?
I was going to say, before you would incur or anything is dispersed, the SBA loan officer that's reviewing your file will be in contact with you and send you documentation. And at that point, written, it's basically a promissory note at that point, and along with the details of the advance being forgiven and so forth. So you will be able to, before anything is dispersed, you will have it in writing what the amount is and all those details. So we're not going to put anyone in jeopardy, if that's the question.
If a business is behind in filing with the IRS for 2 years, does that make them ineligible even though they have all the pertinent information?
It may complicate the situation. And if they get a denial from us, they have 6 months to resubmit it. It's not a final decision, but when you resubmit it, however way they ask you to, probably by email, that you should put that clarifying information in there. And once again, to protect taxpayer dollars, it may complicate the situation if, especially as far as the advance is concerned. I imagine that we need to protect taxpayer dollars, and if you're in arrears, that may complicate things.
Is there a place to find a breakdown of other operating expenses outside of payroll that are eligible for forgiveness?
Not yet. That will be, that's what we're waiting on.
It's coming. Thank you.
It's coming.
The $10,000 initial advance will be forgiven. This is different than we heard from up until now. I'm not sure how that works. The 10,000 initial advance will be forgiven or no. This is different than what we had heard up until now. I guess we've probably covered that.
Yeah. And the reason it's different from what we've heard up until now is because this literally was not an option until Friday when the president signed the bill into law.
If we choose not to take additional funds after the advance has been sent, this will be forgiven. The answer is yes. What is the turnaround time to hear if you are approved or not, and for how much?
I believe I answered that earlier. We're trying to speed up the process because of the situation. Normally after in a disaster, like after Hurricane Maria and Irma, I mean, these things took 2 weeks. So we're hoping to beat that.
Salaries of employees are considered part of cost of goods sold. Yes. Correct?
Yes, they should. I tell people to look at their Schedule C and how they reported in their finances and previous tax returns, because there should be it should be related. It should be you based on how they reported the business in the past.
How is amount of economic injury determined?
It's determined based on the needs of the business, the ability of the business to eventually repay it, and also the available liquid assets of the ownership. To demonstrate that without the loan, they will not be able to pay their ongoing liabilities, their ongoing expenses, like loan payments and things like that.
If one applies for EIDL, is the forgiveness portion of the PPP always available?
So here is where this additional information that we're waiting on for PPP is important. We know that people are going to be eligible for both of those programs. What we're waiting on is to be able to see what all of the options are through EIDL, PPP, and a couple of other things to make sure that we can help you maximize the benefits that you get. So for instance, you can't double dip. So, we need to really see that stuff side by side, but an example would be is that you wouldn't want to use the EIDL loans to do nothing but payroll and then ask for, the PPP for, inventory or something. So just hang tight and we should have that hopefully in the next few days to where we can do kind of that side-by-side comparison for folks.
Is GM Auto Franchise available to participate in this program?
The SBA has a franchise list of the franchises approved, and I think I already answered a couple questions with the link to that, but I'll make sure when you send out the Q&A PDF that is included. A lot, it has to do with, like I said, the franchise list and also, the ownership of business.
How do you determine gross revenue and cost of goods sold if you've not been in business for a full year? Prorate?
You would put in the section of the application that asks for 2019 data is that you would put what you have. So if it's 6 months or 7 months of revenues and the cost,
So
then that's what you would insert.
So just accurately report the right period, whatever it is.
Right.
It was said that 10K advance would be forgiven. What does that mean? We got that already done. What does SNA consider, I guess it's SBA, consider a reasonable fee for assistance of completing the application?
So if we're talking about the EIDL application for the economic injury, I don't believe there's anything that's set. So I know for our other programs like 7A and 504, there is a maximum amount that's set that can be charged by lender service providers to the borrower. We expect that for the upcoming program, it will be something very similar, that there will be a fee maximum that is established by SBA, but we don't have that yet.
The SBA, the sales and cost of goods figure need to be from the 2019 operating year. The figure from 2018 tax returns are not to be used. If the 19 tax returns are not yet completed in 2019, P&L will be necessary? That's a question.
We are telling people that they could use their P&L from 2019 or their last completed we don't need, especially for the smaller businesses and when the loan officer contacts you for the approval and to review things, they may ask for what you got. So if you only have 2018 tax returns, they'll ask for that. They probably will ask for the 2019 P&L. And then, the information that you do have available for what your revenues and costs were for 2019, you would use that. But when it comes to the review process, depending on the size of the need, the loan officer may ask for that information.
So I guess what you're saying is provide the best information you can, and they'll tell you what you need.
Right.
Thank you. Should I wait to get denied, or should I go ahead and submit a new application?
I don't get they are reviewing these things as they come. So I wouldn't, if you submitted it successfully last week or yesterday, and you received, especially if you received the confirmation number, then you're in line. So I wouldn't encourage people if they applied last week and they'd like to take advantage of the advance, then they should reapply with the portal now. But if they're already in line, then they're good.
Okay.
So I want to interject something real quick, Greg, that might answer a few more questions. So we just got a press release from headquarters that we're going to be sending out to the media momentarily. And here's what it says. Treasury and the Small Business Administration expect to have the Paycheck Protection Program up and running by April 3rd so that businesses can go to their 7A lenders, banks, or credit unions, apply for a loan, and be approved the same day. Now, don't ask me what that, I'm just reading you the press release. The loans will be forgiven as long as the funds are used to keep employees on the payroll and for certain other expenses. Here is what it also says. It's going to provide critical capital to businesses without collateral requirement, personal guarantees, or SBA fees, all with 100% guarantee to the bank from SBA. All loan payments are going to be deferred for 6 months. More importantly, SBA is going to forgive the portion of the loan proceeds that are used to cover the first 8 weeks of payroll, rent, utilities, and mortgage interest. So 8 weeks, the first 8 weeks will be forgiven for payroll, rent, utilities, and mortgage interest.
Good answer. Thank you. Are banks providing any of the funding, or is this directly between SBA and the borrowers?
The economic injury disaster loan, it is direct federal loan to the business owner from the U.S. Treasury, so there's no bank involved. Now, when it comes to what Sarah just mentioned, the PPP and that immediate capital that people can obtain through banks, of course, you're involving a bank.
I think we answered the question about how EIDL advances are calculated, so I'm going to go on that. The next question is if we and our employees have applied for unemployment and been awarded, does that affect our ability to qualify for Paycheck Protection Program if we are willing to start paying ourselves and employees again?
There is, according to the press release, there is, they're making some of it retroactive so that you can rehire employees in order to qualify.
I think we talked about the cost of goods sold already. Next question, as far as cost of goods sold of service businesses, what is included in this number? I think we covered that before. They can also reach out to some of us. My bank gave me forms to fill out for a Paycheck Protection Program. I understand from you talking today, you do not have them yet. Is that correct? Is the form I have cannot be correct? In other words, they got bank forms for the Paycheck Protection Program. Could that be right?
if it's from their bank, the they're gearing up for this program, and so if they're they're an SBA lender, I just encourage people to make sure what you're getting is actually from your bank and not a scammer. So talk to your bank, your lender, to ensure what they received. I mean, if a banker handed you this information, then obviously they're beginning to collect the information required to act on this new program on April 3rd, like Sarah said. So, everybody's learning about this at the same time, and the lender, I believe, is doing the due diligence to get the paperwork ready so that on April 3rd, they'll be able to roll.
Okay. Are part-time businesses used to supplement income eligible for EIDL loans?
Well, part-time business, I guess it may come down to how you filed your taxes in the past, and if it in fact is a business as far as the Department of Revenue is concerned. This isn't a program for. It sounds like a downplay somebody, but it's not for a hobby kind of a thing. So it's meant for small businesses, and you technically need to be, a small business in a formal sense.
Can we do both disaster and PPL loans? We already have an answer for that, yes. If so, should we not count payroll in the disaster loan application?
No, they need it. It's two separate programs, and as I said, the economic injury disaster loan is meant to cover ongoing expenses. So, with the cost of goods sold, it was what the cost of goods sold were in 2019 for that business. So, obviously, payroll and other expenses were included. So, they need to be truthful on their application. One program does not jeopardize or affect the other. As I said, these disaster loans are direct from the SBA versus this new program that Sarah just announced is through lenders. So
I'm going to jump past a couple of questions on cost of goods sold and credit, although this was a good one. I don't know about my business credit score. How will that affect my application as opposed to your personal credit score?
it's the the business owner's information is part of the application. So we do look at the credit history of the business owner, and the business itself. The analysis it needs to be demonstrated that the business can reasonably be able to pay that loan back over a 30-year period if necessary. So it needs to be demonstrated when you talk to the loan officer that you have a viable business that can absorb this disaster loan and feasibly be able to repay it. So those are all things that are part of the analysis when it's being processed.
I am in the first year of business, and it's only my wife, there's only my wife, myself, and two others. I'm assuming can they apply? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
We can cut the salary of some people, do less work, and still qualify to apply for this loan.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, this economic injury disaster loan has to do with the needs of the business, and there's no rating or anything related to if employees were dismissed or not, because they're referring to the Paycheck Protection Program. So it's two separate programs.
Okay, we have a question that I think we've covered regarding not taking salary in the coming year, but the the current program we're talking about, the disaster loans, is really not about cost of goods sold and salaries. It's just about survival. So I'm going to move on. EIDL asks for cost of goods sold. What about professional services businesses that do not have cost of goods sold, but the expenses are fixed costs while they're also salary items? How is that considered? Should it be added as cost of goods sold?
Yes, they should put what their expenses were for 2019, and then when the loan officer calls them, that will be clarified.
I thought that if you claim payroll in the EIDL, you could not apply for the PPL. That is not correct. Should we guide businesses to apply for both? Yes. If so, how should we direct them to complete this cost section?
Well, the payroll protection program is going to be done through a bank, and so they need to, the lender will go through their due diligence. With the economic injury disaster loan, they put their costs, their expenses for 2019, or the information that they have available.
If we have only been in business for 4 months, how should we enter 12 months? We already talked to that one. It was stated that labor is included in cost of goods. Then it was stated that labor is part of the cost of goods sold as are for employees hired as of 1/1/20. Yes. Are employees hired after 1/20 included in the labor costs? They would be in the total costs estimated, correct?
It would, but this application doesn't ask for 2020. It asks for 2019. So I would just keep it simple and put your revenues and the costs of 2019.
Okay.
And the only exception I would say is if a business has only been in business for 3 or 4 months going into 2020, that would be the exception. They would put, up through February or whatever. And then that would be clarified with the SBA loan officer during the review. But for businesses that have been established for a couple of years, at least a year, then in this application for the economic injury disaster loan, it should be for 2019. Just keep it at 2019 like the form says.
With rental properties, how do we know how much money we're going to lose? To answer the question, we don't know who's going to continue to pay and where or when, or we can't even evict. How long this is going to last? Lots of questions. Rental business seems to be quite a different case. How would they get help on that?
Well, if they've if they've filed their as a landlord their business, their tax returns and so forth, their revenue, their rent receipts would be revenues, and the costs would involve, if they own a mortgage on the property, landscaping, upkeep, insurance, things that they've had to pay. It's just like a regular business. So the revenues they receive from the business, and then the costs for their rental properties would be completed on this form. It is a business, so revenues are rents, and expenses are everything that has to do with making that a viable business.
We are a small business that have employees on payroll and employees that are contract. Are the contract labor employees considered part of payroll?
No, they are a vendor. 1099 contractors are exactly that. They're a contractor, so that if they owe the contractor or they paid contractors in 2019, that's part of the ongoing cost of the business. And once again, what's used as payroll and what's used as costs for vendors has no bearing on the economic injury disaster loan application.
If you get a loan and the business doesn't end up surviving this in the end, would you still be required to repay? Does it defer back to the owner of that business?
Yeah, it's a federal loan. The economic injury disaster loan is a federal loan, and so that is that'll be there, and that's something that business owners need to take into consideration. I've had a couple conversations already about it's still, business owner, your responsibility, and when the time comes to accept or deny the loan amount that's been approved, uh, all these things have to be taken into consideration. And once again, like I said, there's no obligation for people to take it, and they don't have to take all of it. If they really feel comfortable, taking half of what the loan amount approved is, uh, then that's what they should do. But it's an individual decision.
What if your retail business has had to close for the state stay-at-home order? The rent and utilities continue, but employee hours have been cut to zero. If we get the loan, am I supposed to keep paying employees as if they had worked?
No, for the economic injury disaster loan, it's meant to keep the business solvent. So if the business owner decides to furlough people, which technically means that they're still an employee but they're not being paid, or if they dismiss the employee, that's their decision to make. This loan is to help the business remain solvent and survive this downturn. And so the business owner needs to be judicious in ensuring that they remain solvent. And so it's a tough decision the business owner is going to have to make.
At what point in the loan process are supporting documents and/or required documents submitted?
I'm not getting. I'm trying to look for that question, but basically, we went through the form. They need to complete that. It's when the loan is being reviewed by a loan officer. The loan officer may ask for specific documentation.
How will banks go about funding the PPP? If approved by the SBA, who is responsible for tracking how expenses are spent? Is the bank essentially just a conduit? And if not, what?
Well, it's the PPP is going to be done through the lender, and they should talk to their lender. Their lender will do due diligence, and it's really up to the business owner to use their I guess for tax. I mean, I don't even know the details yet of the PPP and how the business owner is going to need to justify in next year's tax returns uh, how they spent the money and maybe payroll records then. And if they can't show that a loan was used for the intent for something, I mean, I don't even know if there are going to be strings attached like that, but I imagine that in future tax returns, they may need to repay something if they accepted something for a specific purpose. And I recall after in 2009, when I bought a house, I got a tax credit because I bought a house during that downturn. And I remember every year I had to show that I had not sold the house and that I was still paying on it and so forth. Because if I had sold it, then I would have to repay that tax credit back to the government in the following. I think I had to hold the house for 5 years or something. So we don't know what the strings are going to be with this. So, you'll learn more when you talk to your lender, but I imagine, uh, you know, future tax returns and documentation in the future about how things were spent, especially if there are strings attached for specific use, then they need to be aware of that.
Any consideration implications if there are employees of the applicant living in another country?
They're talking about employees here, then that has no bearing on the economic injury disaster loan. So,
Can you remind us what the website to apply is for the IED, the disaster loan?
let's see,
We'll just include it in the information. I submitted application last Friday and was applied for advance today. I received reference number following the submission, but did not get an email with reference number or confirmation following that. How do I know my first application went through successfully? Does it matter?
well, if they applied for the advance today, then they basically submitted what's required to get this whole ball rolling, and they should receive an email. If it wasn't immediate, I imagine it will be done, but they should be receiving confirmation that either on the screen or in an email that their application for the advance and so forth was successful if they did it today or yesterday.
Does the employee count only W-2s, or do we include contract labor in the count?
Once again, this has to do with a PPP program that will be done with banks, and no, an employee is an employee, a 1099 is a vendor, a contractor.
I own a commercial real estate property. I don't have any employees. Can I apply all my rents stop payment? Can I apply if all my renters stop paying their rent?
Once again, the economic injury disaster loan is meant to keep the commercial, the business solvent. And if the renter stopped paying the rent, then the disaster loan would be geared to making sure that it covers the ongoing expenses of that business, that landlord business.
I'm a single member of an LLC that files taxes under an S corp. For my total compensation, I take a salary as an employee, plus take draws as an owner. Can I only count the salary towards the business expense?
I think there should be some correlation with how they did their taxes in the past and how they accounted for that. And I would do the same thing, however they did it in their taxes. So it has to do with the ongoing expenses of the business. And if we're talking about the business entity, and so if the business cut checks, then that is part of that cost.
I still do not understand the cost of goods sold. On a Schedule C, this is the cost of inventory sold in the store. But this webinar seems to imply that the term includes all monthly expenses, which is correct.
It's the because I've seen the same thing. If a business it can't change up on their tax returns, cost of goods sold has to do with product. But for this particular application, you're indicating what your monthly your expenses have been over the last year and what your revenues have been over the last year. And I think things will become clarified, especially for service businesses, when the loan officer uh, talks with the business owner about the application.
Okay. Oh, are you still there, Michael?
Yeah, but I have,
I think it just terminated on us. I only
yeah,
had an hour and a half, and we're now at an hour and 40 minutes.
yeah. So we'll answer a lot of these Q&As, and some of them are repeats. So, but I'm sure we can get as many answers as possible to you to send this out.
It says there's still 136 people on the call and 6 callers, so I'm hoping they can hear this. We will try to respond to all of the Q&A from the point we've just finished, which was at 3:00, the question ending at 3:01, in the email we send out tomorrow. Is there anything else, Sarah, Michael, you'd like to share?
No, I think the press release, in fact, I have to get off this now and send that press release out. But for people to contact their lender and inquire about it, because that program will roll out April 3rd. So that's good news.
Many of the questions from this point forward are replication and clarification. So we will also provide contact information for folks you can call at the SBA and your local SBDCs. And with that, I'm going to call a close to this webinar. There will be another one Thursday at 9 a.m. and next week as well. We can't tell you what the agenda will be for next week. We hope we'll have some PPP type information. But for now, that's it for today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.